Hello and welcome to AMA Puget Sound's Coffee Talk series live on Thursdays at 11 a.m. We've been out for a few weeks, so thank you so much for being patient with us. I kind of took a little break for myself. So we're back, and I'm very, very excited for today's guest, Michael Vinson. Hi, Michael. How are you today?
Hey, Julie, I'm good. Very good. In fact, thanks for having me on. I'm look forward to this for a little while now, so I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we picked this date a while ago, so I'm very excited, especially since we are going to be talking specifically about this topic, healthcare marketing. We have not covered that topic on this channel in 2 years, so I'm very excited to get into it.
It'll be a new one.
Absolutely, and for folks that have been around our chapter, we used to hold, I think, 2 healthcare luncheons per year, which were phenomenal. We've got a lot of healthcare marketers out here, so I'm very, very excited to talk to you. It's a topic I don't know much about, so I'm very, very excited to kind of pick your brain.
Awesome, great.
First of all, introduce yourself to us. Who are you, Michael?
So I am Michael Vinson. I'm the marketing manager of LHC Group. LHC Group is a national home health and hospice company primarily, but it's really all things post-acute and really pre-acute in the healthcare space. And for what that means, or I guess a description of what that means is, your acute side of the industry is going to be, call it, for I guess the uninitiated, hospitals, right? ICUs, surgery centers, places like that, although that is shifting a bit on the surgery center side. But that's where your emergent high acuity needs are going to be met. If you're riding in an ambulance, something like that. And where we work is primarily on the upstream side. So before acute is where we work in the preventative space. So chronic disease management, what we want to do is prevent complication and prevent issues, so that we don't have any exacerbations or anything like that a patient may be dealing with. And then on the post-acute side, after a patient gets out of either an ICU or has an extended stay in a hospital after a significant procedure or a high acuity illness they're dealing with, then our folks will go out on the home health side of the house and provide skilled nursing services, social work services, therapy in the home, with the intent of helping that patient recover as best as we can. And the nice thing about it is, again, they get to do that in the comfort of their home. Yeah. It's typically our part in the continuum allows for a quicker hospital discharge, so you don't have to spend quite as much time in the hospital. And you can get home sooner to the people that you know and you love, or your pets, or your favorite chair that you like, and watch things on your own TV, eat your own food. So we think we have a very significant part to play in the continuum of care in the United States, and that's only growing as the industry evolves and as medicine and healthcare evolves altogether as the years go by.
Sure. And that sounds so much nicer, being able to recuperate in your own home where you feel familiar. You're not going to have somebody coming in every hour, 2 hours, checking your vitals. And
yeah. I mean, it's a huge part of, I think it's a growing part of the industry. And in a lot of ways, as things are going today, it's kind of going forward to the past rather than back to the future, because a long time ago, we'll call it 60, 70 years ago, house calls were not uncommon. It was a lot of, to a large extent, it was how things were done. So as we've kind of moved through the ebbs and flows of the industry, how regulation has evolved, how payment is evolving and has evolved over the course of really the last 20 years from my perspective. And I really haven't been doing this that long, but this is where all of my perspective comes from, is the folks that I work with and the research that I do on my own. But things are changing at a pretty good clip. And what we're seeing now is there's a greater emphasis and a greater value from the patient perspective on being able to recover in your home, number one, because of all the reasons that you just stated. But on the other side, a huge component of this now, of the industry now, is trying to right size, so to speak, the care that's provided and making sure that the outcome is commensurate with the cost of care. So, a lot of people say that what we want overall is lower cost of care across the United States. And that's true to an extent. But the caveat there is that the value has to be commensurate with whatever the cost is. I think
Sure.
one of the things that people may have a tendency to overlook is that if the value is in line with what the cost is, then there's no problem. The trouble starts if the value is significantly below what the cost actually is. So if that formula is out of whack, where value equals what the outcome is divided by the cost of that outcome, the cost of the care delivered, then we've got a problem. And over the course of probably last 20 years or so, there's been this kind of progressive wave of value-based purchasing, which puts that value front and center for what all the providers and the companies are looking to execute on from a strategic standpoint, because largely and that's largely being driven by the regulations and the payers and everybody that is also mixed up in the business. So it's a really, really interesting industry to work in. Which is one of the things I'll tell everybody is, if you're interested in something that is very fluid and has a tremendous amount to learn, and something that are a lot of information to learn, and something that is actively growing. It's not stagnant at all. There's a lot of things happening, from cancer research to even just individual wound care products, or even the med dev folks, or the folks like Stryker that are making hospital beds. There's all kind of innovation happening. And there's a lot changing, and the relationships between the providers and the people working are changing. And so from a marketing perspective, all of that does impact what the consumers and what the customers want and need and desire. And so that's a very, very significant puzzle, I think, for me and the team here to figure out and to work on. So it is a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like you said, I mean, healthcare is one of those industries where it's never going to end. We're
Right.
human, unless we all turn like into cyborgs or something, but then we need a different kind of maintenance. But no, healthcare will always be. So and like you said, with different products that are more in tune to what the patient's needs are, rather than if you could actually elaborate a little more on what's changed in healthcare marketing, that would be really helpful. Like from my perspective, my mom 20 years ago, well, she started about 25 years ago working in medical records, physical records, and her job was eliminated because of Epic. So, and that's just administrative.
That's just one, right? Epic is it's one EMR, and that's a great example of a way that the industry is changing. When you have these, the SaaS penetration is just as strong in the healthcare industry as it is everywhere else.
Right.
But I guess to elaborate on the evolution of customer needs, the first thing about healthcare that is interesting and a little bit different maybe than other industries is that most of I'm going to say most, because I don't know everything about everything. I know what I've been exposed to, but all the time as we're operating, as we're considering who is the customer and the target for whatever it is that we're putting together, the relationship between the customer and the provider is one thing. But in healthcare, there's a third piece. So every time we operate or we do anything, we have to satisfy the relationship between the consumer, who's going to be the person that we would be delivering the care to. We have to satisfy the relationship between them and the provider, who's the person that actually puts in the work order for us to actually go out and execute on that order and deliver said care to the patient. And then the third one is the payer. So if each one of those things is not in alignment, you can have a payer and a provider that both say that care is necessary and medically necessary and useful. But if the patient doesn't want it, the patient declines it, they don't get it. At the same time, if you have a physician and a patient that both agree that a treatment is medically necessary and useful, you'll have a situation possibly where the payer says, we're not going to pay for this. This isn't, in our opinion, and based on what we know, this isn't a medically necessary service. We'd prefer if you went with this other additional service or would forego service altogether. At the same time, one of the interesting pieces is that the physician typically, or the ordering physician, referring physician, whatever we may want to call it, could even be a hospital, whoever the provider is, kind of sits in the middle, where if they aren't vocal about the availability of service to the patient will not know that something is available. And so the insurance company or the payer will never really have an opportunity, or they'll never be part of the conversation, right? We didn't pass go. So this thing that we're looking at it's not even going to cross our radar. That's changing a bit. And the reason that is changing and why it's kind of dovetailing into this discussion is because now there's a greater focus on individual patient need and patient experience than there has been in the past. I'll go back to around the timing of you mentioned of your mom. So that was, call it 20 years ago. And about 20 years ago, or a little bit, we can even go back further than that, call it 30. The prevalent mode of payment, or the mechanism of payment, or the model, I guess, was fee for service. So basically the providers would be paid based on the volume of services they provided. And so it's funny in healthcare, as we're talking about value-based purchasing, what's interesting is that, to anyone else in any other industry, the concept of value-based purchasing just sounds like purchasing, right? If I'm going to buy something, then the value of said thing that I'm going to buy should be more than what I'm giving away for it, right? Be it money or time or whatever it is. And so now, as we're moving away from that volume-centric, service delivery-centric model to, wait a minute, guys, we need to make sure that the outcome that we're shooting for is actually being achieved. So that's where quality comes in, because that's your basically your probability of said outcome that you said would occur is going to occur. And you have to sort of rectify that value proposition with that specific outcome for that specific cost, but also with things like patient experience and satisfaction, which is a bit of a moving target, because again, like we mentioned earlier with acute care and ambulatory situations, if I am lying in the street and I need to go to a hospital and an ambulance pulls up next to me, I'm not going to say, wait a minute, what kind of food does the hospital have? Right. I'm not going anywhere that doesn't serve chili dogs or whatever it may be. Right. So the scope of consumer preference that healthcare marketers have to deal with is really, really, really broad. And it can be anything from somebody who believes that there's something that needs to be checked out in a hospital or an ICU, let's say, who is not on the edge of having some kind of medical crisis, but is upset that they have to sit in a waiting room for 2 hours before they're seen, right? They may not know that the problem that they're dealing with is not to the hospital or its administration an emergent immediate need that must be addressed, especially staffing, given what it is now. To that patient, that doesn't matter. Right? They're a quote unquote customer in their own mind, which is true. That's correct. And they deserve to be treated a certain way. So what you're seeing now, if anybody has been to a hospital recently, what I expect you'll see is a lot of investment from the hospital in experiential, not necessarily novelty, but just experiential services. So you'll see a coffee bar maybe, or in some places you'll see a movie theater perhaps, or some events that they're having for people that to entertain them while they're staying there. Now this is more prevalent in areas where there's a large campus. MD Anderson comes to mind, right? They have a tremendous amount of people coming from across the country staying for a long time. So things like location start to play into that as well, right? MD Anderson, there's a zoo right next to it. It's located right next to a major interstate and an international airport. So there's all these things that factor into it. And while dealing with all of that, we still have to come up with a persona for a given customer, for a given service at a given time, and be able to thread the needle very specifically on what value we are trying to provide these people at that time. And again, like I said, it's not just for consumers. You can't be only consumer focused in the healthcare space. That was easier to do a little while ago, because again, fee for service was basically not an open letter, but a lot of the expansion you saw of the industry was a direct response to that, where there were hospitals that were fairly close to each other, essentially duplicating services and attempting to compete on that basis, where once the standard was met and hospital A has an ICU of this many beds and they have a CT machine and all these other things, then hospital B needs to have those things as well. So there was sort of an overabundance of providers, some people would believe. And so now what we're seeing again is trying to kind of get away from the commodity of healthcare as it existed in areas and encourage patients and families to take an active role in their own digestion of information and content and educate themselves in a way that applies their loyalty to a given brand. I think
Sure. Yeah.
a caveat of this is you'll see healthcare folks all the time, I think, say that we need to educate. People need to be educated.
Yes.
And education is open to interpretation, I think, and that's something everybody needs to keep in mind. People don't necessarily want to go and learn about what causes their diabetes and all the risks associated therein. Maybe education is just showing them that a brand can be likable and can be something that they want to follow and align with just because of the things that that brand does and associates with. You see this in many, many other industries across the country, but it's less prevalent in healthcare outside of some specific sponsorships and things like that. So like I said, it's a very fluid relationship that we're trying to make sense of at all times. And at any given point, there could be something that pops up that, okay, now we have to adjust basically our range card on all these things so that we can make sense of this new problem that we have to negotiate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And it can just go in so many different ways too. So I kind of want to pick your brain a little more and what would you say are the main forces within the industry? Like you've talked about, it's more than just, the patient as the customer. There are other segments to it. So what would you say are the main forces then?
So the standard forces are pretty much the usual ones, right? Suppliers. So you can look at suppliers within our industry from a couple different perspectives. The easiest one in my mind, or the easiest alignment of the supplier force, is with staffing. Yeah. There's a huge staffing shortage across the country. This was, I think, driven mostly by COVID. I think at least that's what set the alarm off for everyone. But so you have a finite amount of staff in order to provide these services. And again, most of the industry, I would say, is service-based. So your asset, your resource is people. You can't put a person on a shelf or warehouse a person until somebody buys it, or put it in a package, right? There are some things that you can do from a company perspective to improve, from a packaging standpoint, let's say the visibility and the appearance of the service provider or the service itself. But service industry and service work is complicated just by its nature of being heavily reliant on human capital. Another force that is relatively new to me, because I knew obviously that it plays a significant role in other industries, but I thought for a long time there's no way that this could happen because what we do is so specific and what we do is so unique. But one of the interesting things you're seeing now is companies that have had nothing to do with healthcare traditionally is starting to enter the space. And what's interesting to me about that is the things that they're trying to leverage, or excuse me, the competitive risk that existing companies face is there are things that these companies do extremely well. Maybe it's not patient care, but maybe it's logistics, right? So if you see somebody like Amazon entering a space, so it could just be something like a telemonitoring space where they want to provide services to allow patients to communicate their vital signs and their progress to a physician remotely.
Yeah.
The thing that Amazon has over everybody else is they know how to scale something. They know how to do distribution. They know how to manage logistics. And for healthcare companies, we have to do that to a large extent, depending on what segment we're in, right? If you're in med dev and you're making devices, you got to get those devices out to the people that order them. You have to manage your manufacturing process, whatever it is. But we aren't a logistics company. We are a nursing company or a surgical company, or we're a physician group or whatever it may be. So those competencies that other businesses have, that as they start to penetrate our space, is something that I think everybody needs to keep an eye on, because that's what they're going to use to get a leg up. It may not be that they have thousands of nurses or, hundreds and hundreds of doctors or whatever. But the risk may be if they get those things, they can move pretty quick. And it's the same thing you've seen with Best Buy or Walmart or any of these groups that are starting to dip their toe into the water. And so from a marketing perspective, what is, I guess, a significant factor in those folks entering the market from my perspective is those are consumer brands. Those are people who have an audience. Those are people who sell things that people willingly choose to purchase. If I'm talking about Best Buy, do you necessarily need a TV? No. Do you necessarily need a dishwasher or a washing machine? No, right? Now, and I kind of put that need up against if you are having a heart attack, do you need to go to the hospital and be seen? Yes, right? That's where that line in the sand is with need. So these companies are very competent at getting people to, or developing an audience for people to go in and choose certain things and services they provide. So they know how to sell things. They know how to retail. And so that's one of the things that I think everybody in sort of the legacy industry needs to keep an eye on, because Amazon has a tremendous following, right? They have a streaming platform. They have a music platform. Not only that, you can order all the different things from them. So healthcare, their little addition to healthcare, they already have a pharmacy, right? And they can send medication to people's houses. If they want to dip into the service sector, they can do that. And now they're a healthcare service provider that has a music and video streaming service. That's a pretty solidly diversified business, right? So all of these things are happening. And of course, you can't predict the future, right? You don't know exactly how quickly all that's going to go. But it does tell me that that's a really strong indication that the space we're in is a good one to be in. It's a valuable space.
Right.
And then I guess the last thing I'll say about it is, from the consumer perspective, again, it's moving away from the idea that healthcare is something that you kind of receive only when you need it and you participate in only when you need it.
Right.
And having a brand alignment and a strategy that asks people to pay attention to you for some benefit of association with the given brand, right? You don't see a lot of people walking around with hospital system logos on their shirt like Nike or Adidas, right? You don't really hear people arguing about whether or not they're, hospital A or hospital B, like you hear about people talking about whether they prefer Coke or Pepsi, right? I think we're going to move into that direction slowly but surely because of all the changes the industry is moving, or the direction of the changes. But that's going to be slow, and that example I just gave is very extreme. So there's quite a few forces at play. Those are three of the most significant ones outside of needing to sort of the foundational one, which is satisfying the patient, the payer, and the provider who's actually going to be issuing, the work order or the referral. So it's complicated, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it feels also as though the customer, the patients are, and it sounds like that you're saying basically they have a little more say in what they're able to do for their own health care. It's not just you go to the doctor and you wait for the doctor to tell you, and you wait for the doctor to give to the pharmacist and the prescription. There's a lot more ability now for patients to take control of their own healthcare, especially with Amazon and Mark Cuban offering medication at a lower price.
It's accessibility, right? It's increasing the availability of care in all of these little pockets where it may have not existed before. And it's really, absolutely. Yeah. The thing about excuse me, hold on, I lost my thought. I need to think about it just for a second. I'm sorry. Consumer choice and consumer preference, right? That is, we're moving in the direction where people will have a significantly increased role in the direction their healthcare is going, and providers want that. We want people to feel confident in the choices they're making to be able to say, I want X, Y, and Z to happen, and we want them to have a choice. But it's moving away from this sort of historic sense in that you don't really, it's sure you have a choice, but what are you going to do? To no, you can do your own research. You can understand your disease process a little better. You can manage it on the front end so you don't have so many complications down the road. And you can interact with providers and learn and ask questions. And they're, for the most part, happy to talk to you about it. And we're in the early stages of that. But from kind of looking forward, I expect to see quite a bit of that more traditional consumer to business interaction over the next several years, where the interaction between a hospital brand or a healthcare company brand is more in line with what you see with some of the larger consumer brands today.
Absolutely. And then that just brings about more marketing opportunities.
Yeah, of course it does. Yeah. And there's more segmentation. You have more channels to speak to everyone. It opens the door to a significantly wider opportunity to connect with people, whereas a lot of the industry, including our segment, is still heavily B2B, which is something I think we could touch on more if we had more time. But
please do, actually. Like, if you want to talk about segments, let's talk about segments. I want to hear this because it's important.
Sure.
So feel free, go ahead.
So B2B in the healthcare space is not quite as complicated as I think people may think it is, at least to me. And that, at least from my perspective, is largely driven by those paying for whatever the service is. So if we take Medicare, for example, Medicare is responsible for paying for a tremendous amount of the healthcare expense in this country. And so a lot of that happens or occurs, we call it, the upstream, the start of the continuum in that acute care space. So that's where cost is typically going to be the highest for an initial, call it an initial visit or initial stay. And then as you step down in acuity down the line, the acuity and the complexity of the care that's being delivered is going to be reduced, which means therefore the complexity of the delivery is going to be reduced, resource utilization, et cetera, is going to be reduced. So the cost is going to go down. So in the B2B space, if you look kind of uphill at where all this stuff is occurring and understand the regulation and the rules that those folks are playing by, you can really start to paint a picture for what your service is uniquely valuable for within the context of that entity. So in the home health space for us, or the hospice space, what's unique to us is that we have, not necessarily to us, it's sure other providers could do it as well, but we can look upstream and say, okay, so if the hospital is being penalized for an above average hospitalization rate, we have to position what we do in such a way that we can say, when people discharge from you, you're on the hook for, say, 30 days post-discharge. And if the patient returns, you're going to be on the hook for that expense. We can assist by offering you a layer of protection and the patient a layer of protection in the home for a 60-day episode broken into 2 30-day periods for this Medicare patient, and providing therapy, skilled nursing, wound care, social work, med management, all these things to hopefully keep the progress that occurred upstream intact downstream so that the patient can recover appropriately and then ultimately discharge from our services and continue on with their life. So really the way to execute on B2B strategy within this space is not very different than in any other space. Consumer is a little different, but not completely, but there's just little nuances. The B2B side is just like if we were selling fleet vehicles or if we were selling industrial equipment to whomever, you have to understand very clearly what the rules are for each segment or each target that you're going to be dealing with. And the nice thing about our space is, from the Medicare perspective, Medicare is very clear about what the rules are. And especially now, again, as we're pushing towards VBP and value-based purchasing, there's starting to be a continued issuance of programs that work specifically to reward improvement in sort of value-based care delivery and penalize either a decrease in value or or no increase in value, sort of a neutral state. So for us, regardless of where in that continuum of care, from high acuity all the way down to your lower acuity spaces, it's very similar to any other business, but you have to be willing to read and understand what the rules are that an individual provider or customer is playing by. Because if you go in and just try to be the flavor of the week or the flavor of the month, or your sales team or your marketing is doing that, where you're just, it's Thanksgiving, here's our logo. That's not going to be quite as effective as I think you would like. And what you'd see in this space is that as the rules change, the folks that know and understand what the rules are and can possibly even interpret what they are for the customers and make the customers feel a little bit more comfortable and like they have somebody who's fighting on their behalf is extremely valuable and extremely useful. So the channel breakdown in this is a little more limited perhaps than what you would see in other industries, largely face-to-face meetings with the sort of old school sales folks. But the value proposition is the same as any other B2B industry or relationship. You have to be able to determine and assign what the value is based on the rules and regulations that your customer is playing under, and be able to make a decent case for why, if there's another person with an equal value, why the switching cost isn't so high, or why the opportunity cost of not going with you is significantly higher than going with this other option. So sure. B2B is quite similar. But again, it's not as simple as going in and telling somebody their hospitalization rate's too high. You really have to understand what the priorities are and what the strategies are of your customer, because if you don't, you will miss something. And if you miss something, there is another dozen people lined up at the door to take the work. So it's interesting for sure.
Absolutely. And it's just, and how healthcare is used compared to, I'm going to go buy a car today. It's different. And then we're about to go over, but if you could just spend a minute or two on how customers in healthcare are different than non-healthcare businesses. Like, you've gone over this a little bit, but if you could just kind of wrap that up.
So it's specific to B2B?
Yeah.
So I think it's really the regulation that we have to deal with. And that's not to say that other industries aren't regulated. But the model has been evolving slowly over time. And I'll use this example because this is a pretty good one. So the oil and gas industry is very popular down here in South Louisiana, and the Southeast overall. But the price of oil and gas fluctuates wildly, right? So a barrel one day could be $100. In 2 weeks' time, it could be $60. In 2 more weeks' time, perhaps it could be $200, right? So that industry is constantly trying to gauge where the safe level of investment is and exists for them. In our space, for the most part, there's less variation in price overall for a given set of services. And really why that is starting to change is because of the value argument, right? Is because now we can't just continue to pay for things because people do them. We need to make sure that there is competition based on the value of the service that we provide. So the difference between traditional healthcare B2B and maybe other industries is that things that are very normal and common to other industries may be very uncommon to the healthcare space. And so a payment change or a change in diagnostic process or something like that may be a wild thing to consider because of the overhead and everything that's involved in adjusting to that new problem or challenge that we have to deal with. So they're not wildly different, but there are some nuances to B2B in healthcare that I think people should be aware of. And chiefly, that's going to be, you have to understand if you're going to be talking to a provider or someone in the space, you absolutely have to understand the rules that they have to play by. Because if you don't, you will not understand how they're paid. You will not understand how they're staffed. You won't understand how they even deliver the services or the product that they provide.
Absolutely. So much to consider. It's not just a quick decision. It's
Yeah.
many meetings.
Many meetings, much talking. Yeah, all that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So as we're wrapping up, I just kind of want to give you a couple minutes to either go over something that you really want to reiterate to the audience, or something maybe that we didn't go over, but something that the audience can take away. Not that I mean, there's a lot that you shared with us, but kind of the TLDR.
Yeah, it's kind of sprinkle some on top of the already full bag.
Yeah, exactly.
What I would tell everybody, I think, or what I'd like people to go away with is, if you haven't had any experience in marketing in this space, in this industry, and maybe you're looking for a change, or you just want another experience, I would really consider looking into the healthcare space from the marketing profession or professional marketer perspective. And the reason why is because it's infinitely fascinating. There are so many things that you have to consider, and so many things that you have to address, that you will never be finished. You just won't. I mean, if you're somebody that likes to tinker and likes to work and likes to develop things, it's a perfect place for you to do that. And like I said, there's all the changes that are occurring. It's not stagnant at all. It's not something that you can kind of learn one time and then hang up your hat and then kind of operate on those KPIs for a year or maybe longer. It's constantly changing, and competition is increasing. And so the sort of, what I think anyways, that there was a bit of and maybe everybody has seen this too, or other people have seen it, marketing in healthcare has been kind of quiet for a little while. It's been kind of dormant, and people are aware of maybe the hospitals that are in their local town. They may see a billboard of them, but they don't really engage with them, and they don't have a really strong identity. And I think as the years go by, that is going to change. And I think it's because of it's out of necessity, of course, but I think if you want to be or play a role in that evolution, this is the place to be. I mean, things are going to change wildly, at least in my opinion, over the next couple of decades for sure. And I think it's a really interesting thing to be a part of. So one takeaway, I think, from anybody is, or for anybody, is, if you're looking for a change, or if you want to experience something new, look into operating or working in the healthcare space for sure. Definitely. That's the one thing. Best job I ever had.
Awesome. That's good to know. I may start looking now.
Yeah. Feel free.
Absolutely. This has been so wonderful, Michael. And I know that you said earlier you could go on for hours and hours and hours, but you've got limited time. So I do appreciate the time you spent with us. And we'll have all of your information down in the description below, so you can check out Michael on LinkedIn and check out his company. And I really appreciate it. If you like today's episode, please hit the like button and make sure you're subscribed, because we did take a little bit of a break, and I don't want anybody to miss any content. So thank you so much, Michael, and I hope you have a great day and a great weekend.
Thanks very much. You too. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.